Serious when driving at night. What is the scariest / most unexplainable thing you've ever seen? I was 19 driving home from my then BF house and stopped at a red light on the very edge of town, like city lights behind me but cornfields and shelter belts ahead of me. Because it's like 2 in the morning, I'm the only one sitting at the red light. I saw something moving in my peripherals, and because of my location I thought it was gonna be a deer. I turned my head and locked eyes with a man maybe in his 50s creeping towards my car. When he saw that I saw him, he froze, and it was then that I noticed he had a tire iron. I ran the red light and sped out of there. I had a similar experience. Except I didn't see him until he attempted to open the door, which was thankfully locked. Ran that light so fast. This was in Kirkland, WA, about 20 years ago. A bit of background. I'm a truck driver, specifically doing shuttle runs for a factory in my city. I run loaded trailers from the factory downtown to a warehouse 20 miles away, where I drop my loaded trailer, exchange it for an empty, and take it straight back to the factory. I run this route 7 to 8 times a night. I'm told it's a diamond in the rough as far as trucking jobs go. Anyway, my route has me cross this rather precarious highway bridge on the return trip. The bridge is only 2 lanes wide with no shoulder. The speed limit on the highway is 70 miles an hour. But this bridge has a steep drop and a sharp curve down to surface level. So the recommended speed to take this curve is 45. A few months ago, around 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, I was in the process of rounding this curve when a car was blocking the bridge, and I nearly plowed right into it. The car didn't lose control or smash into anything. There weren't any tire tracks on the pavement, and the car didn't have any damage. Said car was a brand new Mercedes SUV with dealer tags, so it probably wasn't broken down. And nobody was in the car. Whoever was driving must have just decided to come to a complete stop in the middle of this practically blind corner, get out of his car, and walk away. The car couldn't have been there for longer than 20 minutes or so. It wasn't there when I drove past that bridge in the other direction. I didn't see anyone walking along the highway either. I have no idea what was going on with the car. When I unclenched my seat out of my asshole a minute later, I called the cops to get that car, and I never heard anything about it afterward. I was driving to work, chatting on the phone with my wife to pass the time. 6 to 8 hour drive out to the base from our home, and ahead of me was somebody riding a motorcycle. The road we were on was generally straight Mojave Desert, but had some unpredictable curves because of the road loosely following a broad wash/lake bed like we've discussed. Mojave's desert. The person ahead of me was going between 70 to 90 miles per hour and seemed generally familiar with the road. But then they just sailed straight over the edge of a 45 mph curve going about 80. I made some reactive, disgusted sound, and hung up with my wife. I immediately pulled over, called 911 and put them in my pocket, got my trauma kit, and put on gloves. I was talking to the dispatcher and explaining what had happened when I step over the bank and see, to my surprise, not a crumpled body in the sage, but a young guy, mid-20s, picking himself up off the ground about 75 feet ahead of me and 15 feet below. He'd been launched from the motorcycle, which was in terrible shape, about 30 feet from him. I told him to stay still and went through a quick evaluation. He was basically fine, but super rattled. Ended up having a broken collarbone and a mild concussion. Anyway, it's not a ghost story, but I was absolutely certain I'd just seen a person die, and was completely shocked to find him in fine form, if a little shaken up. My mom told me the story. She was in the car with my sister, who was driving, and they were on their way back from some event. The street lights on this particular stretch of road weren't working very well and it was difficult to see. My sister is chatting away and my mom is watching the road when all of a sudden she sees in front of the car a bike rack, complete with bikes on it, that looked as if it had just dropped off the back of someone's car and they didn't notice. She screams bikes at the top of her lungs. My sister swerves, overcorrects, spins, and then comes to a stop on the other side of the road facing the opposite direction, miraculously avoiding all the cars that were going by. A few cars stop to make sure they're okay. My sister looks at my mom and asks her how she even saw the bikes because she didn't see them until they were almost about to hit them. My mom said she saw them and it looked like they were illuminated by a gentle blue light. But they looked back and those bikes were just sitting in the darkness. Creepy. I was working a night shift and rode a moped to work. The headlight was fairly dim, but on the way home I saw what I can only describe as what looked like black pants, floating slowly just overhead but making a walking motion as they passed. I got a good look and I still can't make heads or tails of what it actually was, and I sure as beep wasn't going back to double check. The Fresno Nightcrawler. That's a cryptid that supposedly just looks like a walking pair of pants. I've not seen it described as floating before. But it's not like there's much in the way of eyewitness accounts out there. My brother and I were driving down a super remote road late at night many years ago. Wildlife was common, so we drove slower than was posted. An accident could be fatal on this road. Anyway, it was a particularly dark night, so we had the high beams on and were really concentrating on the journey. We saw it at the same time. It was impossible to miss. My brother hit the brakes and we skidded to a stop in front of the biggest beeping cow on earth. We could have driven under it with room to spare. It was massive. And it stared at us without seeming to see us. The vibe was so creepy. Other cows were around, but they were regular sized. This guy was the king of all bovine. It doesn't seem all that weird when telling the story, but something was just off with this creature. It didn't seem quite natural. 4 years ago I'm driving across the Colorado/New Mexico border at around 4 a.m. and I'm looking for a place to stop for fuel. I happened along the smallest and saddest little farm town with only one tiny gas station. I hadn't seen another car for hours. It's freezing cold. And it felt like this town was abandoned, it was that quiet. Honestly, it was kind of cool except for the cold. I'm pumping away feeling like I'm completely alone. Until I notice another car in the shadows near the back of the building. Flashy black lowrider with completely tinted windows and 4 right out of a Mexican gangster movie looking guys leaning against it. I remember laughing because 1. They startled the hell out me, and 2. They were wearing the black shorts, wife beater tank tops and the knee-high socks. Remember, it was freezing cold. It was the middle of nowhere. And they looked so casual. Without a word, all 4 got off the car and walked straight towards me until I could see the full sleeves and face tattoos under the pump lights. Dropped the gas pump, fired up the motor and did the greatest 0 to 100 that old girl had ever seen. Not 20 seconds after burning out onto the highway, I see headlights swerve out and follow me. Little did they know, my beat-up looking Dodge truck had the Hemi motor and a couple of upgrades. They never had a chance, and after a few miles their headlights disappeared in my rear view mirror. I didn't think much of it, and even laughed at how bad I outran them till a cop buddy told me about the Mexican cartels running drugs through there to avoid the interstate. I wasn't laughing anymore. I was driving through the city at night when a group of people ran up to my car and tried to open the doors. I sped up, and when I saw a cop I told them what happened, but they just ignored it and told me to go home. Later I heard that it happened to several more cars, but one of the drivers owned a gun and shot several of the would-be openers. They were all just teenagers. The police tried to make it seem like an irate driver harassing kids, but CCTV showed the kids using rocks and steel pipes to try to break into cars.